We have a great panel. This afternoon, we're going to discuss successful strategies to get at the public information that we all need and want. We have a great panel that's comprised of journalists who have used public records to the public's benefit, and also of people who work in government and can help us best navigate the way to get to that information. I'm going to make sure I don't step off the side of the podium here. Let me go ahead and introduce our panel. On the end down here, we have Jessica Priest, a journalist and a two-time winner just today, award winner, who until recently, very recently, worked at the Victoria Advocate, and very soon will join the Gatehouse Regional Investigative Team. She tells me she moved to Austin last week. So welcome, Jessica. Next we have Jeff Coyle. He's the Director of Government and Public Affairs for the City of San Antonio. In that role, he oversees open records, military affairs, government access, and much, much more. He's also a former journalist. Thank you, Jeff, for being here. We can clap for Jeff. Next, we have Joe Ellis. Joe is an executive producer of investigations and projects at KVUE Television right here in Austin. Thanks, Jeff. And closest here to me is Ruth Susi. She serves as Deputy Counsel for Open Records with the State Comptroller's Office. Prior to that, she was an Assistant Attorney General in the Open Records Division with the AG's office. And I'm told that she spends a great bit of her time mentoring public information officers in the right way to get us the information that the public is entitled to, and is a stellar example of a public servant. Thank you so much, Ruth. You know, some of my closest professional relationships truly have been with public officials acting as custodians of records. Also, some of my most maddening relationships in business have been with people in those same positions. So what makes one of those relationships different from the other? Well, in my opinion, it boils down to a few things: keeping egos out of the request for and exchange of information. Not making it a power trip. You know, I have power over you, I cannot give you this information, or I have the power of the people, you have to give me this information. Finding a middle ground there, I think, helps. And secondly, and especially on the journalist side, clarity in the requests that we make. So that's where I want to start, is with the relationships that PIOs and journalists have, and how important it is to develop a polite and professional working relationship with a PIO and a journalist. So let's start with Jessica. You had some interesting things to say in that regard in the notes that you sent back to me. How important is it to develop a good relationship with a PIO?
I think it's really important. Can y'all hear me? Or do I need to speak up? Maybe. A little speak up?
Yeah,
okay.
There you go.
I think it's really important to have a good relationship, and I always try, I think in the notes that I sent you prior to this panel, is I always try to go on the government agency's website and just see what information is already there. A lot of times I could find it myself, and I think that establishes a good rapport with the PIO because they know that you at least, I guess, tried to find it on your own. And I'll tell them a little bit about what I'm working on and what I'm interested in finding out, and ask them, like, how can I find that, versus just like sending them outright open records request. Because I work in Victoria with a lot of small local governments who they sometimes see an open records request and get very defensive and think that it's like a hostile thing, that I'm being mean when I'm not. So.
Is what Jessica is saying, Ruth, is that conversation prior to sending the open records request? Do you think that is a best practice?
It really depends, and I'll tell you why. Because if you know exactly what you're looking for, sometimes it's better to say, you know, if you say, I want a memo that was written in May 2019 between these two people, trigger it. Go ahead and get your timeline started. You can follow up with a phone call if you want to. If you're looking and you're not quite sure what you're looking for, have the conversation first. But it's always better to trigger the timeline if you absolutely know what you're looking for and you've got it described real well. That's what I think.
Another point that Jessica brought up sounded like it was geared toward not wasting the other person's time, making sure that they know what you're looking for specifically. How important is that when you're talking with journalists?
Well, part of this is, and I understand with locals, there's that sort of fear factor somehow, but our job is to help you. So if you aren't real sure what we have or don't have, talk to us. I mean, we're supposed to be doing that. That's part of our function. What people don't really understand with the public information officer is we work for the agency, but we are also working for the public. We have a duty to help them as well. So I will get requests sometimes that literally they're at the wrong agency, and so I'll get on the internet, start looking, figure out which agency to send them to, send them the PIO contact, because that's really the public service. So if you, well, so what I'm saying is that, yeah, if you get on and you're able to do the research or you feel like it, but if you don't have that time or you're just not finding what you look, it is absolutely something that you should be doing. Just pick up the phone and say, hey, I've looked on your site, I'm just not finding it. Can you help me? Do you have any ideas? And just do that. In your relationship, like you said, with the fear factor, the longer you get used to working with people, they'll come to really trust you and feel like they can make that communication. You just kind of have to, I've had people call me and yell at me. I had one person tell me, I know your job is to keep information away from me. And I'm like, well, no, that's really not my job, but let me see what I can do. It's just being really pleasant and overcoming that, by creating relationships over a long period of time.
That sounds like best case scenario, and I guarantee if all of the public information officers I dealt with were as accommodating as you, I think I would have had a lot easier time as a reporter. I know that there were some people who I remember getting off the phone as a reporter so frustrated and saying, I think if I baked this woman brownies and brought them to her office, she would grab them from me and slam the door. Because there are just some situations I think that are mounting, and it has to be that way, the other way too.
It is.
On your end, you must have some reporters who are very demanding.
It is, but part of the thing that I keep in my background is, when I was a little baby reporter, people were gracious to me about helping me understand information and how to find it. Now, granted, public information written requests weren't so popular with the locals, but people would help me. And I do remember once I really, really, really irritated a city secretary, and she decided to stop talking to me and stop sending me meeting notices. And so I drove to her office, and her staff said, why are you here? And I said, I'm here to see her. And they were like, well, she's not going to want to see you. And I said, that's okay. I'll wait in her office every day until she sees me. And finally she came out and said, what do you want? And I said, I want to continue a working relationship. This is my job. I'm sorry I offended you, but I really need the information. And we got over it. She actually did work with me after that. I just had to go and basically sit there for about 4 hours until she became tired of me sitting in her office. So I kind of see it from the other side too. Salvage that relationship. Keep plugging away with it.
Jeff, you've worked on both sides as a reporter
have,
and now
yes.
as a custodian, the person who we're asking for the information. What do you have to add?
Well, let me state the obvious, which is we have to treat everybody the same, whether we like them, don't like them, have a good relationship, don't have a good relationship. So first and foremost, it really doesn't matter how close you are to the individual you're requesting from. We have to provide the records. But you made the comment about not wasting somebody else's time. There's also a part of this that is not wasting your own time. Right. In other words, when we get a request, as soon as those documents are collected and gathered and have been reviewed for legal redactions or what have you, they are to go out. So the timing is often dictated by what it takes to gather those records. And so if somebody asks for a vast amount of information, and I understand the purpose. Joe and I worked across a desk from each other at one point in time. I understand the reason why you want to cast a really broad net so you don't miss something. But by the same token, when you know what you want and you can narrow it down to a request that's going to take a lot less time to gather, you're going to get what you want faster. So there is, so number one, the request should be treated agnostically. It doesn't matter. But to the extent that a relationship helps you refine what you need for the benefit of the time on both sides of the equation, the better off. So that's where I see the working relationship piece come in.
And how do we as journalists facilitate that? When is the best time for that phone call where you say, hey, I'm looking at this amount of information I want, how should I boil this down? Do you work with reporters?
Absolutely.
On that
I've done it both ways, where someone on the front end is just saying, I'm looking for something, and I say, okay, why don't you craft a request that, request this sort of thing, and it helps us get it to them faster. By the same token, I think Ruth's comment is right, that you can put your request in there and then clarify, which we often do. We reach back out and say, okay, what you've asked for is going to generate a lot of emails. Do you want to narrow it? Is there something we can help you do to better refine it? And we'll work with them. So I don't know that there's a right or wrong on either end in terms of the timing of it, but I think the dialogue is better for both sides.
Joe, what do you think about the importance of a good working relationship with PIOs that you cover?
A long time ago, early in my career, I was, and Jeff can tell you, as a go-get-it young, producer, aggressive. Ruth probably remembers some days way back when. But it didn't take me long to learn that animosity you create up front, and it's just really not good, and it's not professional.
Right.
So whenever you are acting like a bulldog reporter, it's one thing to be a good hard-nosed reporter, but it's another thing to always be known as someone who is respectful and does a good job. Plus, you have to remember, as a reporter or producer or anyone that's working for a media outlet, that you're representing your company. And it's always best practice to be professional, to be courteous, and as you go down the road, when people are in those, PIO positions or even office holder positions, you might eventually have a cell phone number and don't even have to call a PIO anymore when you want some answers. That just helps. Being cordial helps develop those relationships over time, where you can go exactly where you need to go for exactly what you need to report on what you need to report on. So there's been a lot of great points made that I'll echo and won't duplicate them, but I believe it's very important.
Excellent. By that same token, what pitfalls are there that you've seen reporters make or fall into, Jeff and Ruth? What pitfalls that reporters have made that maybe made either their requests take longer or made their requests in the end cost their companies more?
I'll go first, Jeff, if that's okay. Sometimes reporters are reluctant to tell you exactly what they're looking for, so they do this very broad net. And it's a lot easier if you have something really in mind to give an approximate date range, who you think might have been copied on the communication or something, search terms, and even if you think you know where it's going to be found. So say, just spell it out pretty clearly. I want emails or instant messengers or text between any two of these 5 people between May and June of 2019, if that's really what you're looking for, rather than saying, oh, I want all emails on this topic, and then I'm running around everywhere trying to figure out, okay, who's got all these emails and who would be involved, because if it gets us to the information faster. And it's not like I'm leaking your story idea to anyone. I just want to know where the information is to get it to you. So if you've got a really good sense of what you're looking for, put it up front. Let us know so we can actually track it down faster, because we can find stuff a lot faster with more detail.
I think that's right, and I guess the one pitfall I've seen perhaps from time to time is when folks are asking for a report that doesn't exist, but the data does. I think I see a lot of nodding heads. I think we all know the law does not require a government entity to create an analysis or report of data because it's been requested, we're required to provide documents that exist consistent with the request. So this is probably not a good example because it's such a top-of-mind topic that we all have analyses, but if you ask for a report of all scooter accidents that occurred in a certain way, if your description of the report is an analysis that doesn't exist already, sometimes you'll get a non-responsive response back. Whereas if you asked for the components of that, how many accidents were there, how many police reports were there, how many whatever, then we will go gather that information and create it. It's just the expectation that, and I think some reporters have this expectation that so long as you ask for it, a lot of effort has to go in producing it and analyzing it the way you've requested, and that's not the way the law works. It's an Open Records Act.
Right. That's really helpful information to me, because the verbiage and the way that you word the request in what you will get back. And I think at least I was under the impression that if there wasn't this report asking for that data that you had to go grab from this place and that place, you would be less likely to get that. But what you're saying is the opposite.
Ask for the data.
Yes.
And then, yeah.
So, Jeff, when I was working on the port story, I would call the port director and to try to figure out the name of documents that I wanted so I could put that in my request, but I never got any calls back or emails back. So the way I worded my request was I said any record that shows, and then I put the data points that I wanted. Would that work?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so long as that record is out there, which it would be, the data is somewhere, then yes, that's exactly it. I didn't give a very good example, but I think you get the principle. If what you're asking for doesn't exist at that time, there's not an obligation to create something new. But so long as you're clear about what the information is that you're seeking, whatever record it's on, it will be produced, should be produced.
You have something to add, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the basic points in your practice of journalism is knowing what you want, and this has been touched on already, knowing what you want, what you need versus what the agency has. What records have already been created, because as Jeff just said, the law does not require an agency to create something that doesn't exist. Even if there is a report, a lot of times I want the data anyway because I want to do my own analysis of the data, compare that to the report. So the way you word a request is definitely going to affect the response that you get. As he said, you may word it in such a way where it yields this volume that you don't need. And if you know that one thing that you need, why veil the request if that's what you're doing? Because it's just going to create a big volume of records and maybe a big fat cost estimate. Again, wasting people's time, wasting resources, and we don't need that. So it's always worth making your requests as precise as you can, unless you're wanting a big volume of information and you know exactly what you're going to get out of it. That's one thing, and you're prepared to pay for it if that's necessary. But yeah, your wording of the request, they should always be as pointed as possible. And again, you should have had that conversation with somebody beforehand and know what they have versus what you want.
We've spent a good amount of time just now talking about the wording of a request. I'm curious for the journalists on the panel. I know in my newspaper the practice is that a reporter never sends an open records request without the editor reading it first and helping that reporter refine that request. Do you guys go over your open records requests with colleagues or with editors, or in your case, another producer, prior to sending them out, just to kind of backstop you in the wording of your request? Jessica?
It's not required, but I like to kind of say it out loud, and my coworker sitting next to me will be like, oh, but did you think of blah, 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 and will help me kind of word it. And the same with my editors. And one thing I find really helpful is keeping like a spreadsheet of all of my open records requests and making that accessible to my coworkers. So like you mentioned, not sending duplicates from multiple people in the newsroom. And I also put on there, I try to figure out, okay, when's the 10-day, and I make a reminder on my Outlook calendar for myself, because I'll like lose track of it. And I do it right in that moment so I don't forget. So.
I like the idea of a spreadsheet that's
Yeah.
accessible to others in the newsroom, and that's really why we require that editor review prior to it going out, is so that we know we're not duplicating, and also we employ some pretty new reporters who might need that guidance in that. Jeff?
Yeah, as much as possible, especially for, junior reporters, like to go over it with them as much as I know that they're submitting a request. Communicating to the newsroom, especially on, daily breaking news events when, you got all hands on deck looking into something bad that happened. It certainly does no one any good if you have 6 people making the same request, and also kind of makes your station look bad and like you're disorganized, so. But I think it's good practice to go over requests with other people, just to make sure it makes sense to someone, for one, make sure it's not too wordy, not too overly broad, and make sure it's easily understood, so.
Absolutely. I want to talk about requesting spreadsheets and data sets as opposed to paper records and PDFs. I, like Jessica, work at a smaller market newspaper where we get most of our documents in PDF form, or not so much or spreadsheets, not so much the data sets that would be easier to manipulate and to analyze ourselves. What are the requirements when it comes to information, to dispersing information that way, Ruth?
Okay. Generally, if you're going to ask for spreadsheets, or you're asking, for example, if someone comes in and asks for a whole series of emails, we're probably going to convert it to PDF and send it to you. If, however, particularly if we're doing redactions, if you need it in a Word version, say that. On spreadsheets, we usually, at my agency, assume we're going to send it out as an Excel spreadsheet, but assume that the PIO doesn't understand that. Put in your request, I want this in the native format, or I want it in the Excel, I want the Excel. Be real clear on that, because it'll save time, and you're going to have to assume they don't really understand that it shouldn't all convert over to PDF, that you do need it in a different format. Because that should be, you're the requester, you're asking for information, you're asking for it in a particular format, so tell them the format if you think there's any confusion at all. Go ahead and do that. Now, if you work with them regularly, they know you're going to get an Excel spreadsheet, they're good at doing it, you probably don't have to put that in there. But when you're working with people you haven't worked with before, or haven't made a request for, or you've had an experience before, go ahead and be very clear in your request.
Have you run into problems with getting documents in, or getting information and data in the way that you would like it? And do you think that it's well known that that's public record too?
Well, sure, but I think kind of the basic premise that we're talking about here is if I ask for information in one format but get it in another, which doesn't happen as often as it used to, in terms of, like, I ask for a spreadsheet and then I get a PDF that shows rows and columns and stuff, which I can't manipulate or analyze in any way. And so that for me is the bigger problem, is I ask for a spreadsheet and get it in a PDF. It doesn't happen quite as often anymore, and it shouldn't happen at all now. There's a requirement. If the agency is able to provide it in the requested or native format, then they should. Why was it in the format that I requested and then you gave it to me in this format? That question should never be answered. But usually that for me, it's data. Sometimes if I'm asking for emails, I might prefer them in PST files, or, in an electronic way, rather than pages and pages and pages of documents. I don't like volumes of paper really anymore. When in this electronic age, I'd prefer electronic, documents or data.
Absolutely. Jeff, did you have something to add?
Not really. I would just remind that, there's somebody also keeping an eye on our efforts at the city level. In other words, if somebody requests something and then it's not produced in the way what was requested, then that person has a legitimate complaint to the Attorney General's office about that entity. So we're held accountable through that process. So.
One thing I do want to mention is even before the law changed, the Attorney General's office has cost rules, and assuming some of these things are going to engender a cost potentially. And the cost rules say basically that if you can provide it in the format requested, do it that way. So there's always been this understanding that if you want it in a particular format and we have it in that format, we should be providing it in that format.
Jessica, did you have something that you wanted to add? Are you getting the documents that you're requesting, or the data that you're requesting in the way that you've requested it?
I get a lot of PDFs, not so much data or spreadsheets. I find that I get the data from the PDFs and then go back and like create my own spreadsheet to kind of analyze or see if there's a trend. Yeah, like I run into a lot of the smaller local governments just saying like, oh, we use such and such software and I don't know how to export it or do whatever you're asking me to do. So
I've had to look it up for them and
yeah.
tell them, look, there's an export button.
I run into that a lot too, which brings me to my next question. As far as education, I know there are requirements for open government training for local governments. I still run across quite often people who, agencies who don't know what they're required to release to us, don't know when they are having an illegal meeting. They should, or they say they don't know, they should know, but they sure claim ignorance of the law quite a lot. Am I the only one in the room who runs into that?
No.
What can we do about that, or what should we do about that? I'm glad to hear I'm not alone.
One of the things that I hear a lot is I'll call and ask like for the status of my request, and they'll say, well, we have 10 days. And I'm like, I try to politely say, no, you have 10 days to ask for an exemption. You have to supply this information promptly. Yeah. So that's like one of the biggest things I would say.
And respond to you in 10 days.
I get that. Our newsroom gets that probably weekly. Really, it is. I believe, and correct me if you guys think I'm wrong. It is what I believe the most common misconception about the law.
I'll just tell you what we've done as an organization. First of all, people responding to open records requests are, by and large, doing that as one of many other duties,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So they're not experts in it.
Okay.
So up until 2014, we had a process where you had to request your documents to the department that had them, which is awfully difficult for the public or for a reporter, and certainly it doesn't address documents, an issue that may expand, across many departments. So we centralized that to sort of professionalize a team that understands the law, and that's what they do day in and day out. Last year, we took it a step further. Our process used to be, let's say somebody wanted all emails that mentioned Joe Ellis. We would receive that request at our office, but then we would send it out to all the departments, and they would all be responsible for gathering the records themselves and then producing them to us. There's a lot of human involvement in that, and you can think about I'm not saying this was the case, but if there was a department head who shouldn't have been emailing with Joe Ellis, you've got that department head's staff tasked with gathering the emails that reference Joe Ellis. So we went to an e-discovery system. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that, but in a real simple nutshell, it allows our central office to go out and do the initial cull of anything that meets that request. And then we work with the department to review it. Are these responsive to the request? Is there anything in here that should be legally redacted? They get to touch it after we've gone out and grabbed it. And so I think it takes pressure off folks who are not experts, number one. It's made it a more efficient process. But then at the end of the day, I hope it has given some confidence to the requesters that they're not being, fooled here, that there's not someone withholding something that they shouldn't. So,
That sounds
And-
like a really
And I-
positive
I-
development.
For what it's worth, I can tell you there is a large volume of emails regarding Joe Ellis in the city of San Antonio between 2000 and 2004.
One of,
Go ahead,
I'm
Ruth,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
One of the things that we started doing is you're centralized, for at least the last 20 years, we have mandatory internal training on open records. Every 2 years, you have to take your open records training, and in addition, we give open records and records management training to every new employee, and we do it to divisions upon request or if we think they've had some concerns. And so we do a lot of training, and one effect of that is requests don't tend to go astray. Everyone's pretty sure of what they're supposed to be doing, and so that helps us as an organization be better able to respond and not have some of these misunderstandings. It's just a lot of education.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the way you say professionalizing it does create that confidence with the requestor. Unfortunately, many, as you said, many smaller towns, the person who's doing that is doing one of many, many other things. And you do have them having to go to, the police chief's assistant to ask for these emails that exist, but they might not be quite so likely to turn over. So we run into some different types of challenges, I think, with smaller municipalities than you do with the larger ones. Jeff?
I think it goes both ways too, though, the training. Part of our onboarding process with new employees where I work and other stations that I've managed, you take one full day in familiarizing yourself with TPIA.
That's great.
And reviewing the TPIA handbook. Because really, as a journalist, if you're not utilizing it, you're not doing your job. And it also helps prepare them better for conversations they may have and making their open records requests. But I really appreciate the professionalizing it, because when cities are able to have a PIO in each department, you can go right to them, and you don't have to go through all this, hey, who's responsible for this? And that's a luxury that obviously smaller, municipalities and counties don't have. I wouldn't necessarily say if there is true ignorance of the law, that's most likely where you're going to find it, because,
Right.
I think that would be insulting, but, it can happen everywhere, but I think we're getting better about it.
Yeah. And I've dealt with, for the record, I've dealt with some really fantastic smaller municipalities. Our district attorney's office is fantastic at helping us navigate some of that stuff, and we're in a relatively smaller county compared to.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the education works on the other side of the equation also, from the requester side. I would imagine most people in this room know the law pretty well and better than most, but we run into a lot of misunderstandings about how the law works. And I'll give you two simple examples. You mentioned the 10-day letter. If we're going to seek an attorney general's opinion, we have to provide notice by the 10th day. Well, often that 10-day letter includes every exemption in the law. And then you follow up 5 days later with the letter that cites the specific exemption or exemptions that you think might apply. I can't tell you how many times I've had reporters call and say, this is ridiculous. I asked for this document and you all have cited every single exception to the law, and we have to explain that's just a procedural step. And secondly, I was just dealing with this week, and the reason why I brought up scooters, in our community, we've had a RFP process to pick 3 vendors to provide e-scooters in our community, because we've been overrun with them like a lot of cities have. And we've had a lot of interest in those responses. And by law, we have to, of course this is changing somewhat, but by law, we have to allow those third-party bidders, Lyft, Uber, Blue Duck, whoever, we have to give them notice that we've received this request and give them an opportunity to seek an opinion from the AG as to whether their proposal is proprietary information that should be withheld. And so we did that. And we've gotten emails from the reporter at the paper with a whole series of questions directed at us and our judgment as to whether they're proprietary or not. What if we disagree with your ruling on this? What if, who decides? And so we have to go through this process of explaining we're really agnostic in this. Our only decision is, does this involve information that could be considered proprietary by a third party? If so, we send the letter to the AG with a copy to these companies, and it's on them to make the case to the AG. The AG makes the decision, and then we live by it. But we're the ones sort of in the spotlight where somebody on the requesting end is feeling like you're denying my request, you're refusing to provide this information by hiding behind this argument. We really are going to honor whatever is decided.
I think that there's a lot that people on our side of the equation don't know about what happens after that initial request is filed. That does take more time, so that's a really good explanation. How long will that, in general, how long would that particular request that you mentioned, how long would that take to go to the companies and then to the AG and give them enough time to respond?
I forget the exact days. I think we have to let the third party, we have to send this to the AG with a copy to the third parties, I believe by the 10th day.
Okay.
And then I think from there, someone else correct me if I'm wrong, I think the third parties have 10 days to claim an exception.
Actually, yeah, it can be a 15-day letter too, but the OAG will accept arguments from the third parties up until they issue that ruling. And when they issue that ruling, we always assume we block out approximately 3 months, because yeah, you got your business days, but so third parties may make an untimely argument. But behind the scenes even further, you get a request in, one of the first things you're probably looking at is, did they assert some sort of proprietary interest, or is this all going to be public and go out? Okay, if they assert a proprietary interest, sometimes we'll say, hey, there's a lot of interest. Are you really going to stand on this, or are you fine with us releasing it? Yeah, we're fine with you releasing it. I've waited for folks to call me back and say, yeah, we're fine with it, so we can kick it out the door. So we do some preliminary work on this stuff to see what we can get out the door, and if they're going to stand on proprietary interest, then we do send it to the Attorney General. We notify them, and then they are supposed to make an argument directly to the Attorney General, and they are supposed to copy us on it, and rarely do. So I don't even know when their argument goes in, what they're arguing, and but we do the best we can to get out the public portion, I think. So there is a little more work going into this than most people see.
Anybody have anything to add on that point? No? Along those lines, misconceptions, you mentioned that one. We mentioned I have 10 days. No, you have to, you have 10 days to ask the AG for an exemption. Any other misconceptions or things that you think are barriers between what a reporter understands to be true and what the real job is that you're doing on the other end?
I don't know about barriers, but I can almost every time somebody requests a document that they think exists and they don't get it back, the assumption is that it's there and someone's hiding it. And there may be cases where that's true, not at the city of San Antonio, but we're used to ultimately being viewed as the bad guy if the record that someone seeks isn't there.
Well, and I can understand, and I'll give you a first-person example of why that mistrust sometimes exists, and not with the city of San Antonio, but with one of our cities. We knew for a fact that this document existed. It was a performance review of the police chief in one of our towns. A performance review. We had a copy that had been sent to us, anonymously, of this performance review. We make an open records request for the performance review, and it's signed, so we know it exists. And the city tells us, oh, no such document exists. So their ultimate, when we were like, listen, we know it exists, and we went to the AG and got our lawyers involved. Well, the document had never made it to his employee file. So therefore, they said it was not a performance review. So we had to be real creative with the way that we asked for it, because, we fired him anyway, so we didn't put it in the file. It can be really frustrating.
Maybe this is for Ruth then. So what should have happened there is that entity should have claimed it was a draft. and let the AG?
It depended on whether they'd already issued it, but even if it was a draft, it's not public policy oriented, so it wouldn't have been withheld. It's a personnel record, so that would have been released. What probably happened is they had a process where you make a request for personnel records and someone goes to the personnel file and checks to see if it's there. If you know it's something that could exist, you need to go back to the division or other people and say, hey, we're not finding this in the personnel file, but we're getting a request for this. Can you check? Because it may be sitting on someone's desk. Once you know the chain of who would have written it, who would have reviewed it, you start backtracking. And the backtracking takes more time. I've had folks ask for a record, and it takes me more time to make sure I don't have a record than to find one that exists. Because I'm like, okay, have you ever heard of this? Do you know of another person? And literally I send out emails like that. Okay, if you don't have it, please let me know if there's anyone else that you can think of who might have it. Give me a call, let me know now. And so then I'm just wandering around, calling people, trying to check out who might possibly hold a copy. But I'm pretty sure that's what happened. They had a process, and they didn't really think out of the box on it.
Well, we appreciate your thoroughness. I guarantee. I guarantee. I wish everyone was as thorough as you. I appreciate that. Well, let's talk about some successes that we've had. We've talked about some pitfalls and some challenges and some best practices. Talk about when it worked. Jessica, start with you.
The Freedom of Information Foundation is great. I call their hotline all the time.
Me too.
They really helped me early on in my career with the Advocate. I was the courts reporter, and I was writing about the Calhoun County, which had been sued by a former employee. She alleged that one of the county commissioners had filmed her undressing, and it was like a harassment case, and it went to federal court. And he fainted on the stand, and so it was a mistrial. So the case settled out of court, and I went to the county and asked for the settlement agreement, and the DA told me, well, our insurer has a copy, and so it's not a public record because our insurer has the copy, we don't have the copy. So we went back and forth with the AG, and the AG finally agreed that just because the insurance company has a copy of it, it still belongs to the county and has to be released. And so that was awesome.
That's excellent.
It took a while, but we kept writing about it and keeping it in people's minds.
That's wonderful.
As opposed to one success, I'll just kind of give our higher level numbers, which I'm really proud of. When we centralized our open records process in our department in 2014, we had 14,000 requests that year. We had 46,000 requests last year, and we're on track to hit 50 this year.
Wow.
Now, some of that's misleading because companies like LexisNexis, big online data companies, send us a whole lot of sort of automatic requests for crash reports and so forth. So it's not that we've entirely more than tripled the number, but we have in terms of pure numbers. What I'm most proud of is from that time, from the 14,000 to 50,000 jump, our average days to close a request has gone from 15 days to 5 days this year.
Wow,
so those,
that's incredible.
Thank you. So those efficiencies we think have helped. I hope it's created confidence in people. The one other piece I'll add is last year we realized that there's some issues that we just get a bunch of requests for, right? When San Antonio police officers wore Make America Great hats again and then got disciplined for it, we had requests from all over the country. Yeah. So rather than handle each one of those by themselves, we created a frequently requested documents page. And when we get 2 or more requests for something, we'll just put them all up. We talked about putting all open records requests up and just having a complete open process. But in all honesty, I think there's a little bit of unfairness to the enterprising reporter who has come up with an idea, is submitting a request, is doing their homework, and then you put it out there for everybody else to see. So I think we've found the happy medium for now, and now there are certain code enforcement cases, for example. We just put them on the web and let people go find them, and it takes those requests off our plate to be able to be more efficient with others.
A recent
Anything to share?
request success story? Well, you know, there have been many over my 22 years in the business, but I don't know, one you guys can watch for this coming Monday if you're in Austin on KView. We do a lot of environmental reporting, and this particular issue deals with basically the proliferation of the rock quarry industry. It's no secret that things are booming here in Central Texas. We have just so much growth going on. And of course, with that kind of growth comes a lot of side effects. One being aggregate production operations, as they're called. We obtain the data showing all the quarries, and so we are showing how over the years how many new permits continue to get issued, and how now people who have retired to the country for peaceful living and stuff within a short period of time can have a rock quarry pop up. And next thing you know, you've got pollutants in the air, there's noise all over the place, there's massive trucks coming in and out and stuff like that. So we obtained the data just to show exactly how much. The data shows a lot. And we had that conversation with the data keepers in that division at TCEQ. Who you know, were very helpful in helping us find exactly what we needed. The data shows all kinds of things, not only the locations and, you know, and what aggregate they're producing, but the amount that they're producing, the amount of pollutants that they're emitting into the air, and things like that. They also, you know, point to some lax regulation of these entities. And so you'll see a series of stories this coming Monday that lay out that problem, which we've been contacted about by not just people that moved to the hill country, but in our surrounding communities and municipalities, and it's a good important issue. But and we've done the same with wastewater discharge permits. You know, growing communities all over the place popping up. You need water and sewage infrastructure, and then you need somewhere for the byproduct to go. Should it be going in our rivers, lakes, and streams? Well, we would hope not, but that's where a majority of the time that it's going. And so we showed how that process is growing and its environmental effect as well. Though it's a series of stories that we've been doing over the last couple of years, and we're not done with those. But anyway, a couple of examples there.
That's great. It's clear the importance that data mining has in this type of really fundamental enterprising type of reporting that's for the public good. So thank you. Ruth, do you have any closing thoughts before we open it to questions?
Okay. I think one of the things that I'm proud of, and it's also due to you guys who are reporters and editors, we made a policy decision many years ago. We waived costs for employees to get their own HR files, for taxpayers to get their own records, and we waived costs for media requests. And I did that with the caveat that if someone comes in and wants us to do $50,000 worth of work, I'll probably send them a cost estimate. But in the 20 years that I've been there, we have never had any media request to abuse the privilege. They are like, yeah, we'll work with you. And so it has helped our collaborative process. We can say, yes, we can get this for you. It might take a little longer on the programming, but we're not going to charge you. And it's like, yep, we'll work with you on it. And we've been able to get our programmers on our side to work with the IT professionals on the other side to create databases, to work on it, to get to where everybody is satisfied. And I think just that policy decision that has been upheld by at least the last 3 administrations has really helped with what I think is a good relationship. But again, no one has ever come in and said, no, I don't care, I want $1 million worth of stuff. They're like, yeah, okay, let's scale it back if it's gonna take too long or cost too much. And that just sort of makes us partners now instead of being adversarial.
That's great. Great point. Thank you. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. Are we supposed to end at 45, I believe? Yeah, we've got one right here.
Well, hello. My name is Tammy Powell, and I'm the new administrator for the Texas Open Data Portal, and so I want to ask a little bit about that. Well, first of all, for the report for the journalist, I was curious, how aware you are that different municipalities like San Antonio and Austin and Dallas have open data portals as well as the state of Texas, and how you've used that to look for information for your reporting. And then my question for some of the government agencies, because anyway, the Texas Open Data Portal, we've got 11 customers. Comptroller is one of them. They have some data sets on our site as well as other municipalities. But you were saying that you had 46,000 PIRs, which is enormous. And I'm wondering how you've been able to redirect some of those requests to your own open data portal and kind of leverage that to reduce the burden on your own departments.
The question, for those of you who might not have been able to hear, is regarding open data portals and how aware journalists are of those, and how much municipalities have been able to use them in order to bring their workload down.
From the journalist end, I don't know if Jessica has anything to add on it, but your group came and talked to us at FOIFT not too long ago, and we very much appreciate that. And I think that's great that you're getting the word out and saying, hey, this stuff is here. You know, we collect from a lot of agencies, and we have a lot of databases, and let's see what we have. You know, come see what we have. So I really think the word's still getting out on that. I've tried to convey it to our newsroom, to peruse in there, and when you're looking for something, see if what you're looking for is there. Admittedly, I'm guilty of not looking in there as much as I should. I think cities have come a long way in providing, you know, data portals as well. And I think it's great because, again, knowing what the agency has versus what you want, and if you can already get it without having to submit a request, is going to save you a lot of time. So I think that's just something journalists are still learning about, you know, as we further grow into the digital age. I think the word just needs to continue to spread and be applied.
Unfortunately, I wasn't aware of it, but I'll check it out and spread the word. When I was responding to Yvonne's first question, I was talking, like, I've been doing a lot of environmental reporting, and the TCEQ's website has like a way, because a lot of times people will call me about like a petrochemical plant, and they'll be like, I see black smoke, what's happening? So I'll go on to like
Daily, I get that call.
Yeah, so I'll go, they have like a database like for unauthorized emissions where the plant has to put on there what's being emitted. So I'll go on, I'll check that. There's also a way to look up like any open enforcement cases. And so that's what I meant earlier when like I can find an answer to a question pretty easily by just using the tools that they have on their website. And if I can't, then I'll go to the PIO and ask them, how do I find that information? But that's a really awesome tool. Thank you.
I think, in answer to your question, I think the open data portal, I think we need to do a better job as journalists educating each other on that, and helping with the outreach that you guys are doing, helping to make that spread further by us taking that message back to our newsrooms and to others as well. You guys?
Okay, well, I do want to make one point. I think when we are pushing public information out, and we use the open data portal a lot, and we have continued to push out data sets. What that does is it makes data more accessible to more people. It doesn't necessarily reduce your request, because now you have an audience of hundreds of thousands of people who are curious about the data behind that data. And so we get requests where, you know, I was out on this site, I saw this, can you put it in context? Can you send me more information? So what we're doing is we're actually engaging the public more, which is a wonderful, it's the final goal. But that means they get so engaged that we also dutifully put, and if you want more information, contact us, and they do. So I don't know that it's necessarily going to reduce your request, but it definitely helps the public get engaged with you.
Yeah, we love it. In fact, I heard it mentioned a few times over the past month as our city executives were going around presenting our budget to the community. Mm-hmm. You inevitably get a question from some neighborhood resident about an obscure part of the budget or line in the budget, and our answer always is the entire budget by line item is there on the web for you to read. So it is a great tool for people to use it. I think realistically a bigger challenge is getting enough people to care enough to take the time to dig through it. In terms of saving time, I think Ruth's exactly right. It doesn't reduce the request, but it does allow us, whether it's the open portal or our frequently requested documents page or whatever, if there is something already there on our website, all we have to do is provide a link. And we've responded to the request. And that makes that open records request open and closed really quickly. That's what drives the numbers down and allows us to deal with the more complicated ones. So it is easier. It doesn't reduce the number, it reduces the time that goes into fulfilling it.
Are there I think that's a great idea, the frequently requested, on another topic, the frequently requested documents. Are there other agencies that are doing that? I mean, are there other municipalities? Has that become a common thing, or are y'all kind of innovating on this?
I tell you the truth, I don't know. I'm not sure whether we got it from seeing somebody else doing it or just recognizing that we had a lot of the same ones.
Sounds like a great idea.
You know, I do think we're sort of in the infancy of this. We do have entities that, you know, put their budgets and financial information at the comptroller site. That was an initiative we had. And I think a lot of the larger municipalities are putting open data portals out. And I know that there was a legislative mandate to push high-value data sets out on the DIR's open data portal. And I don't know how many agencies are doing that currently, but I know that it started slow, but you're adding more agencies all the time to it.
Yeah, so the high-value data sets, they all had to comply, and that was a previous legislation. The new legislation, 819, has made it the central repository for, open data.
Right. How many agencies are participating at this point? Right now is 11.
Yeah, no, we have about 5 or 6 that are just signing their agreements. Right.
So as you continue to educate, it's going to be bigger. It's just we're sort of at the entry stage on a lot of this stuff.
That's great. Thank you for that question. Anybody else have a question? Don't be shy. Oh, I thought I saw one, but you were scratching your nose. Kelly, what have you got?
So I have a question. Ruth, since I know from experience you're real well-versed in knowing that spreadsheets and electronic data and even record layouts are public record and releasable, but there are many, many instances in our state where public information offices don't think that's releasable. And, in fact, we worked on some legislation to clarify this without final success. But what advice can you give other public information coordinators or officers about that? Because, sometimes if somebody's not very electronic or tech-oriented, there's this hesitancy to release it and thinking that they're giving out information they shouldn't be. What can you tell as guidance to others who are in your position at other agencies and governments?
The question was about
record layout.
layouts and,
Yeah.
whether they're
Okay,
and
in spreadsheets. The record layout, if you're providing a data set, the record layout basically says this is what's in it, and it kind of gives you a definitions site. It is hard for me to imagine someone handing you data without that record layout, because your next question is going to be, what is this? I mean, it's efficient. We've always done it. I've talked to my programmers, at least one of who is still here, and we're confused as to why people just aren't giving it out as a matter of course, because that's our policy. If people are not providing it, I would say, I want this data set and I want the record layout with it. And if that is an issue, I think that then you need to be talking to the Attorney General's complaint line. There is another type of data that people have requested, which is they'll want records on your databases. They want essentially definitions on all the databases you have. Problem is, sometimes the only thing entities have is a schematic of their entire database. We've gotten those requests, and what we've managed to do is figure out what is public that is not a schematic of all of our databases that is public, and then we can push that out. Not everybody really understands that distinction. You know, you do want to push out what's public. You don't want the entire schematic that hackers want. So it may just be a matter of some misunderstanding. As far as the spreadsheets, if people are not giving you spreadsheets in their native format, ask for it. You know, they're supposed to be, if they don't have it, if literally a governmental entity is sitting there with a spreadsheet that is now nothing but a PDF, that's the only copy they have, I would be really surprised, but I would want them to have to tell me that. Well, this is all I have is this PDF. You know, we deleted all the spreadsheets. You know, I mean, something. So I would just be upfront in the request and make it really clear, and then you can argue on the other side, because I think the Attorney General will side with you on that. I would.
Yeah. Just to add a little bit to that, I think this problem occurs more with record layouts when you're requesting large volumes of raw data, which is quite often in the possession, being housed and maintained by private entities contracting with government agencies. That can happen at times. And the definition of what a record layout is may vary across, you know, agencies or companies. And so sometimes in those instances, they'll say, well, there's proprietary information or, you know, trade secrets in that record layout. And I'm like, wait, no, all I want is the list of the data field names, the data field definitions, the field character widths, so on and so forth. That way I know how to organize the data. If it's in a raw text format, delimited, fixed width, whatever, I know how to parse it out, and I know what each column of data represents and stuff. So I think in our sense, that's what we think a record layout is, but someone else may think it's something different. And that's why the legislation that was put out there defined what a record layout is. So.
Right, and I think that's the fear factor that you're getting from governmental agencies, is they think that you're wanting something that's going to be a layout for hackers, when all you really need to know is the data fields, you know, and basically, what am I looking at? I mean, that's really what you want and you need. And even if you're getting it from a contractor, you can't hand someone giant amounts of data without at least explaining what it is.
Agreed.
Other questions? That was a good one, thank you. Anybody else? Going once, going twice? Okay, I guess we're done. Thank you so much to our panel.